Who is Alex and what is his homebrewed 1-4 LPVO? Well, Alex is an engineer up in Canada, and he took an already existing platform from a Chinese OEM and had them modify it to his specifications, thus why this is called the homebrew 1-4.
Pew pew pew.
As you can already tell, the illumination on this thing is very bright.
Pew pew pew.
Thanks to its fiber dot illumination, this thing is on par with all of the other high-end, low-end, and everything in between LPVOs on the market.
Pew pew.
Along with that very bright illumination is a very simple and, quite frankly, wonderful duplex-style reticle that's very easy and fast to pick up. It also has a very short magnification sweep,
Pew
which we will be going over much more in depth.
pew.
Before we get into that though, where do you buy one of these? You could buy it directly off his website. They're around $220 US. Let him know I sent you. And as far as the warranty work goes, it goes through Alex up in Canada. He will be dealing with all of your warranty issues.
Pew pew pew. Pew pew pew.
There's honestly a lot of other good stuff to talk about with this scope, so let's get right into it. Alex was very proud to say that he designed the art for both the box and the instruction manual on his own. And good for him. You know, making something your own is, something you should very much be proud of. I already touched on the subject of price, $220 US, and the warranty, which Alex will be handling by himself up in Canada. He's a very small organization right now, but he's looking to expand that in the future. As far as all the features that you can find inside the scope, they're printed nice and neatly on the outside of the box. 5-minute shake awake is pretty damn cool, as well as all the other features that we're going to be talking about very soon. As far as the box, it feels pretty good in hand, and honestly, pretty on par for about the price point. And the quite frankly excellent reticle is printed on the side. Once we pop the top on this box, you can see that the scope is held in with a couple pieces of foam, keeping it nice and safe on the inside. Once we remove the scope from the box and take it out of its plastic bag to keep it nice and clean, you see that it also comes with included scope caps, which is a very nice touch for the price, as well as a kill flash. The instruction manual on this thing is very simple and easy to understand. There's not a whole lot to the scope, so as a result, there isn't that much information that you really need to know about. As far as the scope caps, they're pretty decent. They feel pretty good, and they work well, but as you can see on the front objective at least, it slides off kind of easily. If you were to make sure that you're using these on this scope, I'd recommend putting a little piece of tape on there just to thicken up the outside. As far as the rear ocular housing cap, it actually holds on there much better, but still a little bit on the looser side. However, they lock up nice and tight like you'd expect. I'm going to be leaving them off for the rest of this video. You could also note those two little white hashes on the outside of the tube. That's to help indicate this thing in a standard horizontal mount. As far as the weight, this is the only thing I could really criticize this thing for. It is heavy. 18.7 ounces on my scale is very, very, very noticeable. But we'll be touching on to why that is very soon. As far as the eyepiece in the rear, it is a standard fast focus non-locking eyepiece, and it's pretty good. Threads on it feel perfectly fine, no weird sounds or feels, a little bit of play once you get it all the way out, quarter turn in, but it's honestly on par with a lot of scopes that we see in this price point, if not a little bit higher. Just in front of the eyepiece though is this VCOG inspired magnification ring, and this is where most of the weight comes from. This is a custom extrusion that Alex had made up for this manufacturer to use on this scope. It's brilliant, if I may say so myself, but it's probably the reason for why this thing is as heavy as it is. However, it is super fast, easy to grip this thing and rotate it. Another nice thing about that is this rotation on the magnification ring is only 90 degrees. Another benefit to having only 90 degrees of throw for the magnification ring is not just the speed at which you can adjust it, but it also makes the scope body a lot stronger, because to have the magnification ring operate effectively, you have to have a slot that follows the arc of the magnification ring. So a typical scope, being 180 degrees, has a complete slit through half of the tube. This is only a quarter of the tube, making it thus much stronger than most other optics with a 180 degree throw. It's the little detail stuff like that that makes this scope so cool and makes Alex's attention to detail noticed. But with positive reinforcement sometimes comes negative reinforcement. There's no number indices on this thing, so you don't know where you're at minimum to maximum without memorizing left low, right high, or just looking through the thing. Beyond that, though, it is very fast and easy to grip this thing and turn it quickly. But I think even if you reduced it to about half the length, it would save a lot on weight and still act almost as effectively. From there, we're going to check out the illumination control, which is rheostat. Some people will like that, some people won't. 1 off position and 11 on positions. The battery compartment on this thing is a standard style cap, and you could only imagine what sort of compartment we see when we open it up, but just know that for whatever reason, the numbers on the illumination control are rotated a little bit funny. Typically, the numbers will be indexed vertical when you're behind it, so this way you could easily see what they are. But on this, they're perpendicular to the actual scope body. It's odd, but it's a choice. As far as how the illumination control actually feels, the detents on it are very deep and very sharp. It's actually quite nice. When you go to adjust it, it pops out and pops right into the next detent very, very nicely. It honestly feels much better than scopes, even 2-3 times the price. You can only imagine what sort of compartment we have underneath the cap. It takes a standard CR2032 battery and our standard 3-dimple board and our 6-prong spring on the cap. Totally standard, even on scopes well over this thing's price point. Perfectly fine compartment, and I've had no issues with it. The turrets on this thing being capped is the only way to really have a 1-to-4 in my honest opinion. And the turrets are pretty good once you take the caps off. They feel good, they sound good, and this thing functions well enough when it comes to tracking. Being a set and forget scope, as long as there isn't a lot of slop inside the erector when you make an adjustment, meaning you make an adjustment and it goes there and it stays there, I'm perfectly fine with it. And these turrets more than exceed my expectations. One last thing to check out is the kill flash and how it mounts. It screws into the front part of the tube, and it's really sleek. It's wonderful. Very low profile, very nicely done there, Alex. Anyway, let's get behind this thing and find out more of the modifications that he's made to it. If you're a longtime viewer of my channel, you will remember that I reviewed the Vortex Crossfire 2 1-to-4 probably 5 or so years ago. This scope is based off of that scope. That's right. Alex went to the same Chinese OEM that Vortex went to and made their Crossfire 2. So this is based on Crossfire 2 architecture and glass. So if this guy Alex can do it, many other companies can do it as well. Taking super bright illumination, throwing it inside of an already inexpensive made housing, and trying to make something better than companies like Vortex can produce. Kind of interesting to see. In fact, I love this whole concept of tweaking things to make them vastly superior. The illumination on this thing is nuttily bright as you'd expect from all of the other LPVOs in this segment. And the reticle, to be brutally honest, I love it. For a 1-to-4 with a simple Battle Zero, I couldn't ask for anything more. The turrets sound and feel okay. Again, for the price point, perfectly fine. And I should also mention that Alex, I feel, wisely decided to have this thing be in half MOA increments per click as opposed to quarter, because the finer it is, the less detent you're going to have. It's really hard for me to track anything less than a 6x maximum optic down here. We're at 41 yards. It's very dark. I do have a very bright light above my tracking target, so I make the most of it. The only thing we could really look for here is as I increase elevation if the reticle shifts, and it doesn't. It tracks perfectly fine for 9 mils of elevation gain, which is excellent. It even goes down, or up rather, whichever direction you want to go in, perfectly fine. And it returns to 0 each time. The same performance is found with the windage, going all the way to the right and then the left. It performs perfectly fine, and it returns to 0 just like where we started. As far as slop to the erectors, I wasn't able to notice any. The nice thing about having each click be a half minute is that you can see the big jumps easier, and as a result, it's easier for me to spot only here at 41 yards with the 4X if there was any sort of play, and I couldn't find any. One last test we can perform is decreasing the magnification to minimum and then bringing it back up to its maximum. I noticed no shift on the reticle to the target, which again is about as good as we could hope for a scope like this. It's overall a very solid performance. Being a 1:4, this thing better perform good at least the minimum magnification. If you have a 1:4 and it doesn't perform well at 1x, then what's the point of even bothering having it, in my personal opinion? The reticle on this thing, again, is something that I cannot stress enough. It's great for this magnification range. It's very simple. It's very easy to pick up. And you just run a battle 0 on a 5.56, like a 5200 on this would be absolutely flawless. Illumination on this thing is very, very awesome. Great, in fact. I don't know why all manufacturers don't run fiber dot illumination on all their second focal plane scopes. The technology's out there. Every OEM can do it. So I really hope that moving forward with every production model that comes out of every region around the world, fiber dot illumination like this is going to be found in it. At 4x at 81 or so yards, we have a very good looking image, and our depth of field is quite high. That tree at about 15 to 20 yards, all the way up to that tree at 81 yards, was nice, sharp, clear, and in focus. As fantastic as the illumination is, there's still one thing we have to check. Does it actually have auto off? Well, I come back about 15 minutes later, and it is in fact off. So the only thing left to do now is tickle it just a little bit to see if it wakes up. And it does without issue. Again, if this scope can have Shake Awake for $220, every scope can. The last thing we have to touch on with the outside box and all of its information is finding out about the insane Eyebox, which is insane. The 1X Eyebox on this thing acts like a red dot. It's unbelievable how large it is. As far as forgivingness, it's pretty good, but unfortunately, like Icarus, I think Alex flew a little bit too close to the sun. As big and as crazy forgiving as it is at 1x, it starts to suffer from severe image distortion at the far extremes at 1x. And as we slowly increase the magnification here to 2x, you can see our off-center image stability is fading fast. We can look through it technically from 2 feet away, but when we get close to where we need to be for perfect eye relief, if you start going a little bit too far off center, albeit like you're in a bad position somewhere on the bottom of a VTEC barricade, you will start to notice image issues. At 4x here, again, the Eyebox is large, but once you go off center, it really starts to lose a lot of image quality fast. So it doesn't matter how big the Eyebox is if you can't really use the scope, either seeing the reticle or the target beyond at an awkward position. It's the only thing I could really criticize with this thing optically. Unfortunately, that's a pet peeve of mine, and Alex really prioritized having a giant Eyebox, and it shows. The Eyebox in this thing is massive, and you can get behind it at almost any magnification at almost any distance. But like I said, I think he stretched it just a little bit too far. I would love to see this with a slightly smaller Eyebox. Even a 50% smaller Eyebox would still be large and impressive. But I would love to see if the image stability is increased by 50% as a result of that. If so, I think there's a better balance that could be had here. As far as its low light performance, it does a good job of light transmission in lower light environments like this. The illumination on this particular setup was with his old board, where it was a much brighter minimum magnification, and it slowly ramped up to being stupid bright. On the new board that he sent me, which I just installed, it goes to a much lower minimum brightness, so this way you could probably use it with night vision if you so choose. As far as translating that into what you could actually expect, here we are with the original board. We're going to start at 0, work our way up to its maximum from its minimum, and then we're going to do the same thing with the new board. As you can see, number 1 is already visible to the naked eye on fairly bright conditions on a very light target. So it is very bright at the minimum and then just gets progressively brighter from there. At full brightness, this thing is blindingly bright. You'll probably almost never have to use it at its maximum brightness. With the new board installed, the same exact sweep going from off minimum to maximum looks now like this. Once we start changing the illumination, you can see we don't see anything for 2, 3, 4, 5, there we go, 6, 7. And keep in mind, this is got 11 brightness settings. So we don't see it until almost halfway through its sweep, but it still gets to the same maximum brightness. I kind of hope that he leaves it as an option for people to go with either board, because I think some people would prefer one way versus the other. Getting right into the comparison segment. On the left will be Alex's LPVO, and on the right we're going to start with the primary arms SLX Nova. As a lower budget option in the 1 to 6 magnification range, the SLX Nova is very high on everyone's list, or at least it should be. It offers extremely good looking glass, very bright illumination, and a very practical, usable, and efficient reticle. There's ultimately not a lot I can say negatively against the SLX Nova, with the exception of its off-center image stability. At 1x it's pretty decent, and at 6x it's pretty decent, but the in-between magnifications really does fall apart. However, beyond that, the SLX Nova is superb. Everything about it is great. Alex's LPVO here at 100 yards, at 4x, also produces an extremely good-looking image. I honestly can't fault it whatsoever. But the view through Alex's scope compared to everything else we're going to look at is smaller, and the SLX Nova really does have this giant view looking through it. It's very impressive when you get behind it. I would give the overall colors, I would give the overall image to the SLX Nova, and because it does have 2x more, it is a bit more of a compelling argument. It is going to be more expensive than Alex's, a little bit over $100, typically a little bit more, but if you do find an SLX Nova on sale for a little bit less, obviously that number will go down. As far as overall weight, Alex's scope is about an ounce or so heavier than the SLX Nova, so it's not that far off, but given that it's still a 1 to 4 versus a 1 to 6, and, you know, the view through the Nova is larger. The illuminations are about the same. The reticles are personal preference, but they're both honestly very good for the magnification ranges. The differences between the 1 to 4 and the 1 to 6 in this comparison are actually pretty stacked against the 1 to 4. The SLX Nova is a great optic for a lot of very good reasons, and it comes back to the very good warranty from a very good company. And you can get them for a pretty decent price, even though their initial price has gone up dramatically. But that's because they can charge, and they being primary arms, they can charge almost whatever they want for the SLX Nova because people are still going to buy it. It's that good. The biggest thing with Alex's scope versus the SLX Nova is going to be primarily the weight. If Alex's scope was 15 or so ounces, it would be in a completely different class over the SLX Nova being over 3 ounces lighter. But unfortunately, it's just not the case. The only real benefit to Alex's scope over the SLX Nova is going to be in the Eyebox department. But again, as big as it is, it suffers greatly in the image department. From one extreme to the next, we're going with still one of my favorite LPVOs of all time, the Steiner P4XI featuring the P3TR reticle. Very similar to the Nova. The P4XI has a very simple, easy to read BDC reticle with very bright illumination. These P4XIs are in the $700 to $800 range, so well outside of the budget for most people that would seriously be considering Alex's LPVO. However, the P4XIs are made in the US and they do run German glass. They have also been nothing short of fantastic for me. I've had this one for many years. I bought a second one at the exact same time, gave it to my brother. He has it on his Steyr AUG, and it's, again, been nothing short of fantastic. In conjunction with having very similar style reticles, very similar brightness to the Illumination, the Steiner has a much larger view looking through it and a slightly smaller scope body. Most of the large scope body that we see with Alex's scope has to do with the magnification ring, and it's not as bad in person as it is behind camera. It's a little tricky in that regard. However, the P4XI comes in over 2 ounces lighter. It might be more expensive, but it is an overall vastly superior optic. However, I do prefer the illumination control on Alex's scope as opposed to the P4XI, because the P4XI has this very mushy turret and it just sort of like rolls in and out of the detents, and it doesn't really fill you with a lot of confidence. Alex is a very aggressive snap, and I really, really like that. Overall, between these two, there's very little to compare, if I'm brutally honest. The P4 is a vastly superior optic in most ways, and it just overshadows Alex's scope, but it also costs 3 to 4 times the price, so that is something that we have to take into consideration. If you're looking for a lighter, less expensive 1 to 4, well, we could take a look at another option right now. Don't mind the TR24 on the top right corner, ladies and gentlemen. This is actually a Gen 1 PST 1 to 4. I reviewed this a while ago, and I actually quite liked it. I thought it was a very good optic for a couple of things, but reticle option is not one of them. The reticle definitely favored more towards the quote-unquote precision side of things, but being a 1 to 4, having a duplex like what Alex chose for his scope setup is a much better idea than what Vortex did with their Gen 1 PSTs. You could still find these used, sometimes even new. Vortex offers now what's considered the Ranger optic, which is basically what the PST Gen 1 was. However, most of them were uncapped windage and elevation turrets. You could very, 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 very seldom find a capped version of the PST Gen 1. Hop actually got his hands on one, but it broke like 3 or 4 times, and he was like, I can't have an optic that's just going to immediately fail on me. And I mean, who could blame him? Optically, the PST Gen 1 and Alex's LPVO are very close to on par with one another. I was very impressed with how the PST performed when I had it. And if you note, the views looking through them are almost the same, as well as the scope profiles. However, the PST Gen 1s were made in the Philippines, where Alex's is made in China. But again, the PST Gen 1, probably 10 plus years old now, so very old technology in that. So I just did a quick Google search, and apparently on Amazon, you can still buy the Vortex PST Gen 1 1 to 4s for around $330. Which would I choose? Well, given the fact that the PST Gen 1 is the same weight as Alex's, I would go with Alex's. I much prefer the reticle, the illumination, and all of the controls. Sure, it might have some image stability issues, but I'd absolutely go with Alex's for the overall package. The only thing I can fault is the image stability. Is it something that you could work around? With a good cheek weld, you'd probably never even notice it. But that's the only thing. Weight-wise, these two are almost identical, and because of that, the PST Gen 1 doesn't hold a hope in hell against Alex's scope. And on the other end of the spectrum is now an actual Trijicon TR24. I've gotten my hands on a few TR24s over the years, and all of them have performed the same. Optically, disappointing. Build quality, physical features, and all of that jazz are excellent. They feel really well made, very solid in hand, very simple optics. I love the turret system. The magnification ring is also pretty decent. The illumination control, being fiber optic with a tritium tube, definitely takes a little bit getting used to, and it isn't going to be for everybody. If you don't like the amber triangular post, as you see with this particular TR24, you can get a couple of different options. However, it's also going to cost over $700, and it might weigh 14 ounces lighter, but that's as good as I could get the image to look optically. It's horrible. Absolutely horrible. Alex's 1 to 4 vastly outperforms the TR24 optically, in my humble opinion. I also really prefer having battery-powered illumination on a reticle like what Alex's just because if you want to have it turned on, you can turn it on. Whereas with the TR24 or most Trijicon products with tritium illumination setups, you can't really do much with it. In fact, two of my friends were running mini ACOGs 1.5s, and they had to put duct tape over the fiber optic tube to not have the illumination bloom out during the daylight hours and not be able to see their targets. And that actually happened on a few stages at a big 2-gun match. That is, of course, going to come down to personal preference. If you're cross-shopping a TR24, are you going to be looking at Alex's LPVO with any sort of real intent on buying one? Well, you should, because I think it's a much better overall package than the TR24 is, especially for the price point. If you really want what the TR24 offers, but in a much better package, pony up and get a TR25. It is a vastly superior optic in every single way, shape, and form. And it's honestly, if I had to make a list of the best second focal plane 1-6, regardless of budget, the TR25 would be very, very, very close to the top. What more can I say about this very low budget Crossfire Gen 2 modified optic? It's impressive. And it's impressive for a couple of reasons. First off, the overall setup on this thing is great. The magnification ring being as large as it is, having the ramp on it like a VCOG, and only being 90 degrees should be on almost every LPVO, in my opinion. Super easy to grab, adjust, modify, and just get on whatever magnification you want very quickly. And again, it also has the added benefit of making the scope tube stronger, because there has been some failures with Crossfire 2s in the past, because again, half their tube is missing to have a pin go through it so the magnification ring can adjust the magnification. The same thing can even be said with LHTs from Vortex, the razors, because those are very thin wall tubes to be as lightweight as possible. And if you just so happen to drop your rifle and your optic gets hit, there's a likelihood of you denting or destroying the scope as a result. This modification that Alex has made to this scope fixes a lot of those issues. Now, no, I haven't taken the scope off and thrown it against a wall to see if it would survive, but it feels so robust and sturdy in hand that I wouldn't really worry about it too much if I was to actually do that test. Another impressive thing is that for the price point that Alex was able to make this thing for, low 200s US, it's got one of the best illuminations on the market. It's got a very simple and very effective reticle. It's got an incredibly nice magnification ring that we've already gone over in depth. It comes with a kill flash. It comes with scope caps, and it's got shake awake. If Alex can do it, any other big company should be able to do it. We should be seeing 1-4s like this that weigh sub 16 ounces with all these features for under $400, but we just don't. And you might be of the camp, well, maybe a 1-4 isn't good enough. Okay, you should be able to find a 1-5 or even 1-6 of very similar specifications for very similar price points. And sure enough, we do have a lot of optics in the market for the 1-6s, but I still think that ingenuity and the drive, the necessity to make a better product could drive the market to being that much better for all of us. And if this is Alex's first real attempt at making a scope for the public in his own vision, well, then I say hats off to you, Alex, because this is quite impressive what you've been able to achieve with it. I do think its biggest fault is not even its weight, it's just the image stability. I would love to see the Eyebox get shrunk down a little bit to try to have the image stability come up. And if the weight could be reduced by about an ounce and a half, I think this thing could be very competitive in the current offerings that we have on the market today. With all that being said, a huge thank you for Alex for sending this in for review. I thoroughly have enjoyed using this, and I do plan on giving this out to people just to use and abuse to see how it holds up in time. And with that, thank you all very much for watching. As always, I'll see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, Thank you very much.